about 80 civil society groups are calling on government to extend socio-economic relief to the poor for a few months. Now, the current 350 Rand social relief grant and the 500 Rand caregivers allowance will expire at the end of this month. The 250 Rand top-up for a range of social grants, including foster care, disability and others, are also set to expire. The Institute for Economic Justice is now estimating that those extra grants saved almost 9 million people from hunger, and it's warning that if the safety net is removed, South Africa will face a humanitarian crisis. Let's unpack the story now. We're joined by Shaeera Kalla, who is a project associate with the Institute for Economic Justice. Shaeera, good morning. Thanks very much for your time on the AM report. I've got the fact sheet in front of me here from the Institute for Economic Justice, the case for extending the COVID-19 special grants. And just looking at some of the numbers that this document outlines, I mean, it's no overstating, these relief grants literally saved, as we've just said, millions of people from hunger.
Yeah, and I think if I can just come in, I'm joining as a member of the Cash Transfers Working Group on the C19 People's Coalition, and we've been working very closely with the IAJ, but my project associate position is on a different project, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Clarity, yeah. Shaeera, talk to us about the lockdown. I mean, we know that the lockdown has already had a massive and widespread impact on various sectors of not only our country but societies around the world. But what's important to point out is that it's that section of the population that was already vulnerable pre-COVID-19 that were the worst affected.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the stats, before any of this happened, more than half of our population was part of the working poor. So even if people were employed, they were earning less than 5,000 Rand a month. And then if you look at it now, approximately 70% of adults are living below the upper bound poverty line of around 1,280 Rand a month. To make things even worse, if we look at the NIDS CRAM data, in June, 37% of people ran out of money to buy food. If you're working in communities and you're in touch with what's happening, you understand the devastation that this pandemic has had. It's been a once-in-a-century global crisis. And if we can't see the minimal, basic things that we should do to ensure that people don't starve, what we're asking for is really not a lot. We're looking at the caregiver grant and the COVID grant. The caregiver grant and COVID grant need to be increased to the food poverty line at least, which is 585 Rand per month. Currently, they're both too low. The 350 Rand has not been able to provide for people, for households, but it has staved off many from starving. We've seen that despite it being very low, the benefits are indisputable.
Shaeera,
and it's clear on that.
Yeah, absolutely. The COVID grant is currently at 350 Rand. Is that correct? What are you looking to increase that to? What is the projected amount it should be increased to, in your opinion?
So our demands are threefold. The one is to increase both the caregiver grant, which is at 500 Rand, and the COVID grant, which is at 350 Rand, to the food poverty line, which is the bare minimum. This isn't even considering that people need to pay rent to survive. And that is an amount of 585 Rand. So both of these grants need to be increased at that level. The second is to extend these grants. You'll know that these grants were put into place temporarily. Yep. And as civil society, we've always understood that that was going to be a problem because it assumes that once the lockdown is over, people can just go back to jobs. We've seen that isn't the case. The economy is far from recovering and the pandemic is far from over. We might even be entering a second wave. So how do we expect people to survive if we just snatch these grants away? And the third demand is to improve the communication and administration around these grants. We've seen people standing in lines outside SASSA and SAPO only to be turned away the next morning because there aren't grants for them. So that from an administration perspective, there's a lot to be desired on SASSA's part. We've also seen that even when people have been receiving the grant, it just isn't enough. And hence the increase along with the extension is vital for us right now. And can I just say that to do this, it would save 12.7 million people, right? And it would also allow us the space to consider what our long-term plan is to provide social security. We all know that we are pressed financially as a country, but unfortunately, when you're the most unequal country in the world, you have to provide for the most marginalized, especially in a moment like this. We will be judged as a society by the most vulnerable and how they get through this moment that we find ourselves in. Unemployment has reached a high that is unimaginable. It is the highest that it's ever been in our young democracy. So we really are facing a challenge, and we need to act. Government needs to get its head out of the sand, and understand that by not providing these grants, they are making a decision to put people into a position to choose between starvation and survival. And that is no choice. That is a cruel choice.
Absolutely. And I mean, if we look at the criteria that was set for those who would be eligible for the special relief grant in particular, are you looking for that criteria perhaps as well to be expanded?
Yeah, so that's why we've said we want, as part of the 3 demands, we want to improve communication and administration around the grants, as well as reassessing the criteria.
Yeah.
Because the criteria has excluded millions of people. This idea that you have to prove how deserving you are when unemployment is structural, when inequality is intergenerational historically, and when people are, poverty itself is a reality and has always been a reality in our country, is pretty irrational. And that's why, as part of this, we see the extension of the COVID grant, and the COVID grant being given itself, which provided millions of people who previously were not included in the social security system a chance, a lifeline. We see this extension as part of the movement towards basic income guarantees. And that has been a call that has been extended across the world. I think we're all realizing that the idea that you have to have a job for you to have a dignified livelihood is becoming more and more unreasonable, given how precarious livelihoods are becoming all over the world as a result of capitalism.
I mean, if we look at our unemployment numbers, as not even the official numbers, those unofficial numbers that put our unemployment rate at well above 40%, and I think even that might be very conservative, then you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I mean, look at youth unemployment as well, right? We've got some of the highest youth unemployment in the world. Currently, we're working on some workshops with Equal Education to mobilize the unemployed youth around this demand, because they're really going to benefit from it. And I'm not saying that this is a solution to our poverty and inequality. It is the bare minimum. And if you look at how much this demand that we're asking for will cost, we're looking at about almost 37 to 40 billion rand. That actually isn't a lot of money. I know for a fact that if we were to increase our taxation to our 2% of our top earners at a 10% increase, that would give us 40 billion rand. But I don't even think at this stage we need to go there. We already have enough money within the fiscus. We just need to be spending it on the things that need it the most.
Yeah, and I mean, I can already hear government's response to the demands to increase not only the amount of the grants, but also the duration of the grant. It's where are we going to get the money from?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a bit irrational that we live in the most unequal country in the world, and yet taxation has been untouched. Everyone should have a shift in perspective right now. If you are privileged and if you have food to put on your table, you need to ask yourself, how is it that you're not going to create an environment where that basic dignity of being able to feed yourself can be a reality for most people? And there's a reason why we've set cash transfers and not jobs guarantees. Of course, jobs guarantees are something that we'd want to consider going forward, because most people don't want handouts. And these grants are not handouts. This is our social responsibility to, if we call ourselves a society that is functional, it is our responsibility to take care of those who are most vulnerable. But it's also our responsibility to understand that it is historical injustice that has created the divides that we currently live with. And it is redistribution of these resources that is vital to our recovery both our recovery as people, but also the recovery of the economy. You can't separate the economy from the people. And I think that is the first mistake that our government makes when it fails to see the necessity of increasing and extending these grants as an immediate demand to ensure that people can at least not starve. That is, for me, to be having a debate about people not starving seems almost absurd.
Yeah. Shaeera, I mean, it's almost now, we're counting down to the end of October. That's when these special grants are essentially finished. When do we get a response from government on what the plan, what the way forward is?
Government should be meeting today or tomorrow with the cabinet. And these decisions are on the table. We know they've been on the table for a long time, but we've had reason to believe that the consideration around creating a budget for increasing and extending the grants has not been on the table. And that is why we were very concerned, and we felt that we had to bring this issue onto the national agenda, because it affects every one of us.
Absolutely.
If we can't share the country's resources, we will share in its destruction.
Shaeera Kalla, as always, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us about this incredibly important issue. The call here from about 80 civil society groups is to extend not only the COVID-19 grant, but also the caregivers allowance, extend it in terms of the time frame, but also increase it at least to the food poverty line, which is 585 Rand per month. An incredibly important story here. Millions of South Africans literally saved from hunger.